Hello, and welcome to Radical Engagements here at Varmblog. And we are doing a little bit of a different take on the series. I'm continuing to do my long series on authority, going through the text by Judge Sabo, and then I have several other texts as part of that series that'll be coming up. More talking about, other elements of Engels and Lenin and Marx tied into these debates around authority and around other things involving Engels that are controversial. So you can see my multifaceted side after spending so much time just on the authority argument. But we are also I'm going to go into a series on the life and times of Amadeo Bordiga, founder of the Communist Party of Italy, member of the Communist International, and a leading figure later on in the left communist formulation, the International Communist Party, the ICP. Bordiga was associated with the Communist Party of Italy until 1930, when he was kicked out, being accused of Trotskyism. He was already someone infamous, being one of the members mentioned in ultra-left left-wing communism and infantile disorder by Lenin. But let's go into his biography a little bit. Bordiga was born to an agricultural scientist in the province of Naples in 1889. His mother was descended from an ancient Florentine family of some repute, and his maternal grandfather was Count Michel Amidei and was a conspirator in the Risorgimento, which I'm going to mispronounce all the Italian names. I am sorry, my Italian listeners. Correct me as you see fit. So he was involved in the bourgeois unification of Italy and a conspiracy there within, even though he was a minor nobleman. His paternal uncle, Giovanni Bordiga, was also involved in and was a mathematician and a professor at University of Padua. So Bordiga was born into somewhat minor aristocratic / petty bourgeois circles, but his background was highly scientific and very radical. He was an opponent of the Italian colonial war in Libya, and that introduced him to the Italian Socialist Party, the PSI, by his high school physics teacher in 1910. Bordiga founded the Karl Marx Circle in 1912, where he'd meet his wife. And he graduated from Naples as well, from University of Naples Federico II in 1912. When he founded the Karl Marx Circle, Bordiga rejected the view of the party vanguard as a pedagogical apparatus. The theory kind of currently at the time held by the Second International and Kautsky about the role of what the party vanguard was for, and developed a theory of the party himself, where the organization was meant to display a non-immediate goals as a rally of similarly minded people and not necessarily a body of the working class itself. This was to change later. Bordiga was also opposed to representative democracy early on because he associated it with bourgeois electoralism, unlike the Second and Third Internationals, who took the position that this was an ultra-left deviation held common by both the Council Communist and the Dutch-German tradition and by, this wing of the Italian socialist group. He also campaigned, like many other Latin country communist groups, against Freemasonry, which he saw as a non-secular group. Bordiga saw himself as more Lenin than Lenin. He rallied to the communist movement and formed the communist abstentionist faction within the PSI. Abstentionism in that it proposed any participation in bourgeois elections whatsoever. This would form with another group called L'Ordine Nouveau, or the New Order, I think, in Turin, around Antonio Gramsci, who become a later backbone of the Communist Party of Italy himself. We all know about Gramsci. This led to the beginning of what would become a split. When there was an internal struggle to the PSI, when the PSI had voted not to affiliate with the Third International in 1919, because it refused the 21 points and thus refused the purging of the reformist wing of the party. So you need to know the 1918 Bolshevik platform, which was actually pretty left-wing, but had these 21 points, which required a break with the reformist in the Second International, which even led to like the CPA, which had arguably sided with the Summerswald left in World War II, for example, not being able to join. Now, there's a lot of right-wing stuff in the not CPA, the SPA, the Socialist Party of America, but nonetheless, if Deb's party can't join, that's a problem, right? Bordiga attended the Second Comintern Congress in 1920, where he added 2 of the points to the 21 conditions of membership proposed by Vladimir Lenin. This is, the 21 points we just mentioned. Nonetheless, despite being more or less in line with the new program, he was criticized for his parliamentary abstentionism and left-wing communism and infantile disorder by Lenin himself in 1920. Victor Serge spoke highly of Bordiga, as later did Trotsky, and Bordiga occasionally spoke highly of Trotsky, although there's going to be problems there, and that's going to be relevant to the other text we're discussing today as we get to it. When the PSI held a congress at Livorno in 1921, representatives sent by the Comintern all insisted that the party must expel its reformist ring, which was led by Filippo Taranti, and they were divided about whether or not they could work with Giacinto Minatoni Sarati, who was another key leader in the Italian socialist movement. Sarati was a communist politician, and he led the left wing of the PSI later in 1924 into a merger with the Communist Party when he was elected to the Central Committee. So there was a debate over which factions in the PSI could be dealt with. A leading Comintern representative, Paul Levy, the key figure of the center, was opposed to this, but Bordiga's advocacy for an immediate break with both Sarati and Taranti prevailed against what the Comintern wanted. Although other Comintern figures who were Marxist-Leninists, like the Hungarian Rex Soci, which I'm bouchering, I really don't know how to pronounce those names, backed. So Bordiga emerged as a leader of the Italian Communist Party almost immediately. He was one of 5 members of its executive, but was considered more or less the de facto director of the party. Now, Bordiga's view of the party is interesting. He viewed it as the social brain of the proletariat, whose task was not to seek any kind of majority support. It was to maintain an invariant program and to work out the program so it could be instituted by an armed insurrection, which would seize power and then abolish capitalism to court and impose a communist society by a dictatorship of the proletariat, which would be managed and maintained by the dictatorship of the party. And thus establishing the party dictatorship as a representative of the dictatorship of the proletariat would be and should be the party's primary aim. And some reasons this has led people to somewhat mischaracterize, given some other things Bordiga did. Bordiga is more Stalin than Stalin, but in his belief in the absolute centrality of the party and that democratic mechanisms within the party were a problem that led to political manipulations, this would lead to all kinds of issues later on. But his position was actually accepted by the majority of the members of the Italian Communist Party. And this would bring them into conflict with the Comintern again in 1921, when the United Front tactic was adopted with organizations to fight for reforms and even to form workers' governments. Bordiga rejected this as a reversion to the failed tactics of pre-war social democrats, and he thought that this led to the first revisionist debates, and leading to the Bernsteinian and Lassallean reformism emerging. However, because Bordiga was a party disciplinarian, unlike, say, the Council Communists and the Dutch and German ultra-left, he accepted the Comintern's position and decisions as binding because it was within the party mandates. Bordiga was arrested in February 1923 on trumped-up charges by the new government of Benito Mussolini. And because of this, he had to give up his post as a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Italy. On his acquittal letter, Bordiga decided not to reclaim his position as in the Secretariat, and implicitly accepted that he was now in a kind of tacit opposition to the mainstay of the Communist Party of Italy. At the Fifth Congress of the Comintern in July of 1924, Bordiga was the sole voice of those who opposed any cooperation with socialist parties in favor of a united front from below, not above. Now, ironically, after 1927 in Marxist-Leninist Third Periodism, this position, of which Bordiga was kicked out of the party for, was actually adopted as a stance by the Soviet Union. This is what led to the period of Third Periodism. And United Front from Below was acceptable because it meant that workers who were not communists could be worked within the trade unions. And this is a position that is slightly more accommodationist than the Dutch and German Council Communist position, which thought that communists should only work in their own trade unions. This was also a position that was a little bit more accommodationist than the KPD was in Germany, the kind of left faction there. However, this meant that they could not work with parties, and the Bordigan extensionism would be maintained. He argued that the rise of the Mussolini and the fascists were not a serious threat to communism, but only a change in government of the governing personnel of the bourgeois class. This is a position kind of maintained by left communists in the Bordigist and even some post-left communists in the communization tradition, and phrases like the only thing worse than fascism is anti-fascism or whatever. Bordiga's refusal to go to Moscow to attend the plenum of the Comintern executives, and his absence was accused of being led him to accuse of being in complete solidarity with Trotsky. He also did some polemicizing with Trotsky. At the Third Congress of the Communist Party of Italy, held in exile in Lyon in January 1926, a maneuver of the pro-Moscow group was completed, the center joining with the right, and I'm going to go into this more in an article, and we're going to read together in a minute. Bordiga's Lyon theses were rejected, and those of the Stalinist minority group, which was not as popular in the party, in the Communist Party of Italy, which was represented by Tagalati and to some degree Gramsci, were accepted. Bordiga was arrested again in December of 1926 and sent to a prison in Usica, which is an island in the Tyrrhenian Sea. And he met up with Gramsci, and they actually, despite their political enmity, seemed to have been somewhat friends and worked alongside each other as comrades. And this is often not talked a lot about in Bordigism today. Bordiga was concerned about Gramsci's own health and seems to have been involved in a plan to help him escape from the island, which did not happen. In 1928, Bordiga was moved to another island, Ponza, where he built several houses, and which he returned to even after his detention to finish. Bordiga was released in 1931 because his niece married a fascist. He also posed with a group of black shirts around the same time, and this photograph was published in a fascist newspaper. It is unclear why he did this, except maybe to stay out of prison. This has been a point of contention against Bordigists as collaborators for a long time, particularly after some later French Bordigists would pick up negationism in regards to the Holocaust. And we'll come back. I'm not going to go into that today. It's not relevant to the Lyon thesis, but it is a controversy around Bordiga. In 1926, Bordiga would, Bordiga was expelled in 1930, accused of being supporting, defending, and endorsing the position of the Trotskyist opposition, which is hilarious considering the differences between Bordigism and Trotskyism and the left opposition and left communism, which are actually distinct things, but were often accused of being the same thing in this time period. Bordiga left political activity from 1930 to 1943, and he refused to comment on political affairs at all, even when asked by his trusted friends. Many of his supporters went into exile, and they found their tendency referred to as the Italian end of the communist left, as opposed, again, to the Dutch-German end. In 1928, members in exile in France, hence the Bordigist relationship to French left communism and ultra-leftism in general, and in Belgium, formed the left faction of the Communist Party of Italy, which became in 1935 the Italian faction of the Communist Left. This name was changed to reflect the Italian Communist view that the Communist Party of Italy and other Communist Party have now become counter-revolutionary, which is an even harder stance than the Trotskyist Party took. Remember that classical Trotskyism was kind of wishy-washily defensist on the Soviet Union as a deformed worker state, or in certain forms of emergent Trotskyism, emergent into World War II, a kind of bureaucratic collectivism. Those were the two early Trotskyist explanations of the deviations they saw in the USSR. They also thought that their party and that they should be a fraction of a party, and that the party needed to be international, and that they opposed any form of frontism whatsoever, not just united frontism or popular frontism, but even using front groups. That the program was to be inviolate and invariant, And this would be the basis of the Italian left communist faction. Bordiga would rejoin them after World War II, so he just stayed very quiet during the fascist period. And this is thrown against him later. There have been some accusations, particularly the reports of Angelo Alata, that the fascist police in Italy visited Bordiga's home in where he holidayed with his wife, and that Bordiga actually supported the Axis powers. Broder believed that Nazi Germany was weakening the European giant, which with him was the greatest exponent of capitalism, and thus the defeat of Britain would bring about revolutionary conditions in Europe. Now, I want to point out, this is something for all, if this is true, this would actually be a pretty big fucking deal, in that it also shows Bordiga deviating pretty strongly with the Zimmerwald left position of Lenin's crew in World War I, that one did not pick sides in such a debate. Now, I've never seen this confirmed other than the reports of Angelo Alata, so it's hard to know if this was true. This would be used to criticize Bordiga as a secret fascist collaborator, or at least sympathizer, by the Italian Communist Party under Togliatti. All right. Bordiga also criticized Joseph Stalin for aligning with Western allies against the Axis in April 1943. He probably was not happy when they dropped the third period position for the Popular Front position as well. Although, again, but we don't know this because these are based off secret reports, and Bordiga kept his mouth shut during this time period. But a lot of the criticism that Bordigism has a softness towards fascism comes from the fact that the maximalist position was also held by Mussolini, and that isn't that far from Bordiga's position before Mussolini flipped sides. That Bordiga was really quiet from 1930 to 1943. And yeah. After 1944, he returned to political activity and joined the Naples faction of Socialists and Communists, a grouping that dissolved into the International Communist Party. But Bordiga did not actually initially join, despite being linked to the ICP. He did contribute anonymously to its press, but was so worried about any personality cult developing, particularly after what he thought happened in the Soviet Union. He would only work collectively and would not sign anything, which also makes deciding what was actually Bordiga's published in this time period a little bit difficult. That will be important later when certain texts that probably weren't written by Bordiga, such as the Holocaust: The Last Alibi, were attributed to him. He joined the International Communist Party in 1949. This current split in two. He took the side of the grouping that took the name of the International Communist Party, publishing its communist program. He contributed extensively to the ICP until his death in 1970. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into all the positions of which Bordiga held, and I'm writing an article for Strange Matters about the repopularization of Bordigism in the teens and probably what the social conditions that led to it were. But also, I want to give him a fair shake. I have disagreements with Bordiga. I think his hostility to democracy goes far too far. I think his notion of an invariant program is actually out of step with Marx and Engels. But there's a lot in which I think he's actually pretty insightful on. Although, for example, when debates about whether or not we should deal with workers' formations and national liberation, Bordiga actually did not side with the Dutch and German council communists, who he took to be going too far. National liberation was consistent with Bordiga's initial endorsement of the Bolshevik program and his view of the party. And he had no problem working through trade unions and business unions and whatnot with workers, as the proletariat emerging from below is different from above. Now, this led to one of the things that is a tension between Bordigism and Trotskyism as the two left deviations of Leninism, the others being left formations of Maoism that formed in the 60s and 70s that have kind of fallen away. Is that Bordiga endorsed the United Front from below, also endorsed by the USSR during Third Periodism, but rejected the United Front from above. So you don't even work with bourgeois and other socialist parties to abstain from things. The Popular Front allows communists to join governments and to govern with progressive bourgeois parties. The United Front allows them to work with them, but to not. The United Front from above and below allows them to work with them and to do abstentionist moves, but not to form unity governments. That's why it's the United Front and not the Popular Front. And frontism is also not subject to applying democratic centralism to the front. That's the United Front distinction from the Popular Front. These distinctions often seem very minor to non-Marxists, but they were incredibly important at the time. So the kind of what you would see as the spectrum of this would be Popular Frontism, which allows you to join with progressive elements of the bourgeoisie to form governments and do national liberation, even in a joint government, and definitely to fight with them. United Front, where you can fight to stop things, but you don't form unity governments with bourgeois parties, and that would include social democrats, but you do work with them on issues that are important to you, such as anti-fascism, etc. And then the United Front from below, which accepts that you can work with workers in non-communist trade unions, but you cannot work with them in non-communist political parties, even if they're social democratic or Marxist, Leninist, etc. And then there's the Dutch and German position, also sometimes a position of Northite Trotskyist. That's Trotskyist around the SEP, the Socialist Equity Party in the United States, and David North, that you are not to work with business unions at all, or trade unions, that only communist run and worker run unions are acceptable. And this also means that you do not join any electoralism whatsoever. That's similar to Bordiga, but you also don't work with, syndicates or trade unionists, etc. You basically, if you're a council communist, you work through workers' councils. Bordiga took this as going too far. The reason why council communists believe this is beyond the scope of today's discussion, and I've already been going a half an hour and I haven't even read the first text. Today we're going to be reading a text by the International Marxist Tendencies website in Defense of Marxism by the author Roberto Sarti. The conflict between Gramsci and Bordiga in the early days of the Italian Communist Party and the Lyon theses. I think this is a fairly good article, but it's still based in a Ted Grantite or IMT based understanding which is I don't want to go into who's really an orthodox Trotskyist, but let's just say it's a deformed worker state style Trotskyist group from the UK that's also influential in the US and Canada to some degree, that kind of maintains a traditional, I'm not going to use orthodox, I don't want to get into that debate, line of Trotskyist parties on the understanding of the USSR and on United Frontism. So I think this article is interesting. I'm going to point out where it seems to elide some differences that it should probably go into, and some things I might disagree with it on. But I think it's actually pretty factually accurate in a way that even many Bordigists would probably agree with. I'm then also in the next episode going to go into an interview done on Bordiga in Jacobin magazine, and I'm going to put all the links in the show notes. And then I'm going to do the introductions, I think, by the International Communist Party to the Lyon Theses, to give you the Bordigist understanding of itself and the context. And then I'm going to actually do the Lyon Theses. And after that's done, we are going to go into the back to On Authority on Engels. But note that since I'm doing writing on Bordiga right now, I'm going to be doing a lot more of the OG text and contextualizing them, because it actually helps me with the writing I'm doing as well. I think I'm going to hold off on doing the long durée of the In Defense of Marxism article today. We will go into it in the next episode, because I think this is already getting really long. It's already half an hour, and all I've been doing is talking about the capsule biography of Bordiga. I have also written on Bordiga. Something I wrote of him is available at LibCom, and I'm writing a much more extensive piece for Strange Matters, I hope, that might also be a part of a book of essays I'm doing on the development of the left in the United States while I was not in it, and what after I returned between 2012 and 2023. And this book will be called From Wonktopia to Barbarism, and it will probably have an article on the appeal and decline of appeal of Bordigism in the internet left and in the broad left, because Bordigism kind of had two movements. One had to do with communization. One was a rebirth, a renewed interest in things like the Communist Party International, the International Communist Current, and the International Communist Tendency, which are groups, and in other groups that emerged in the aught teens as well. Very small groups, but nonetheless, it did show that there's real interest there. And then Bordiga's use in Gilles Devey and communization theory, up to and including the debates in Notes 1. For those of you who don't know that nerdery, you can look it up. I'm going to be doing a lot of this stuff to re-understand the context of the communist left and left communism today. People know that I no longer identify as a left communist, but I was strongly sympathetic, and I'm still strongly sympathetic, frankly, despite what people may say. I just think that the nomenclature no longer means anything without a Comintern, really. And I am not a holder to programmatic invariantism, nor do I take extreme of positions as council communists do on relationships to currently existing unions, etc. Although I think we have to be pretty honest about the limitations of both guild and business and trade and industrial unions in the current situation and what those differences actually are. Frankly, sometimes reading business textbooks on this shit would be more useful to you than pretending it's 1920, but that's just me. like and subscribe. This is a weird radical engagement because I didn't read the text yet, but I'm going to break this up. So I'm not going to try to do a 40-minute biography and contextualization and then read a contextual article on top of that, and it'd be like 2 hours. So check us out on the next episode. We're going to go into Roberto Sarti's, the conflict between Gramsci and Bordiga in the early days of the Italian Communist Party and the Lyon theses. Have a great day.